Remember, guys, you have to use your mic during this time. Miss Caruso cannot hear you if you don't go ahead and use your mic. Well, look at the spelling of this night. So it's night as in day and night. Okay. If you turned on your speaker right now, guys, I don't know what's going on today, but we're going to need to turn that speaker off, okay? Let's turn that speaker off. Everyone should have their mics muted at this point. Miss Caruso is going to start reading. Thank you. Okay. So something was worse than the night, since Lakai didn't answer. I'm thinking, ooh, monsters are worse than the night, but they usually come at night, so I don't know. We're going to go ahead and dive into this chapter. Usually we go ahead and we're able to think about what this chapter might mean just based off the title. Okay, so something worse than the night. The next morning, the darling children were measured for their trees. Hook, if you recall, thought it was silly to have one tree for each lost boy, but it actually made a great deal of sense. Each different-sized boy had a door that fit him as perfectly as a tailored suit. A tailored suit is a suit perfectly made for you, sewn to fit you perfectly. This way, they could all enter the cave at once, without having to wait in line. More important, no other body except each lost boy's exact body could fit in that particular tree. This was especially helpful in the case of sneak pirate attacks. After a few days' practice, the darling children became very quick and graceful about using their trees. To enter the cave, they sucked their breath in, and down they went at exactly the right speed. To rise, they sucked in and blew out, and so wiggled up. So to go up the tree, they would go ahead and just, they would have to breathe in and out to go ahead and wiggle up. They also grew to love their new underground home. It was simple and sweet, a bit like camping. Even Wendy stayed there now. It was lonely in her own house, and this felt so much more like a real family. The cave was one large, cozy room with a floor made of dirt. The boys used mushrooms as chairs and sawed off tree trunks as a table. There was one big bed on which all the boys, except Michael, slept, packed in like sardines in a tin. Because space was so tight, there was a strict rule against turning around until one boy gave the signal, and then everyone had to turn all at once. So you couldn't just toss and turn like you might do in your own bed. You had to go ahead and if one person needed to go ahead and turn sides, everyone had to turn sides. Michael could have slept in the bed too. There was always room in Neverland for one more. But he was the littlest, and Wendy liked to pretend that he was her baby. So she hung him in a basket next to her bed. Her pet wolf, who followed her everywhere, slept on the floor, guarding them both. Tinker Bell also lived in the cave, in a tiny space carved into the wall, no larger than a bird cage. Over the entrance to her room hung a curtain that she could pull shut when she wanted privacy. Small as it was, Danila, during these meetings, we turn off our video. Please keep your video off. We are listening and following along. Tinker Bell also lived in the cage, in a tiny space carved into the wall, no larger than a bird cage. Over the entrance to her room hung a curtain that she could pull shut when she wanted privacy. Small as it was, Tink's room was the fanciest part of the whole cave, filled with the finest fabrics, soft tiny bedspreads, and delicately carved antique furniture. "Your house may be bigger," Tinker Bell informed Wendy, "but mine is better." Still, Wendy had bigger concerns than whether Tink's house was better. The boys kept her so busy cooking and cleaning and sewing that weeks would sometimes go by before she left the cave and saw daylight. It makes one long for the old single life," she thought wistfully, as a real grown-up might. So she was so busy doing all the chores and going ahead and keeping the house nice and taking care of everyone, kind of like your parents do, right? So she was like, "Oh man, I wish I was back at my old house where I didn't have to worry about all this." As for her parents, she missed them and worried about them. But there was something about Neverland that made time and those worries blur. Somehow she was confident that the bedroom window in her parents' arms would always remain open for her to fly back into. I want to stop and just think about that for a second because that confused me. So she's there, she's thinking, she's doing all these chores, and then her thoughts are, as for her parents, she missed them and worried about them. But there was something about Neverland that made time and those worries blur. Somehow she was confident the bedroom window and her parents' arms would always remain open for her to fly back into. So she thinks that she's pretty confident. She believes that her parents, the house and her parents, everything will go back to normal if she wanted to. What did disturb Wendy, however, was the fact that John was starting to forget their parents, and Michael had already forgotten them entirely. He actually thought she was his real mother. She's not his real mother, she's his sister. To fix this, Wendy set up a little school with their old life as the subject instead of spelling or math. So instead of school stuff like spelling or math or reading, she went ahead and her school would be to go ahead and teach them about their old life so they could always remember it. The other boys wanted to go to school too, so she let them sit in. Of course, they always failed the quizzes, especially the ones with hard questions like, "What color are Mother's eyes? How did we spend last Christmas? And describe Father's laugh." Peter never came to school or took a quiz. He said it was because he despised mothers and holidays, and even sometimes laughs. But really, it was that he couldn't read or write. While the other boys were in school, Peter would go off alone, whether he went on real or imaginary adventures. Wendy could never tell unless she or one of the other boys had also gone. And with Peter, sometimes, not even then. But Wendy had many of her own adventures. Which such tale would you now like to hear? The night attack by the Indians on the underground cave, when a few of them got stuck in the hollow trees like fat Santas in chimneys. Or perhaps the time Peter saved Tiger Lily's life in the Mermaid Lagoon, and so made her a lifelong friend. Maybe I should tell you instead about the cake the pirates baked and kept leaving around to make the boys sick, but which Wendy kept finding and snatching from the hands of her children, until it got stale. They didn't want it anymore, and Hook eventually tripped over the hard stale lump in the dark, stubbing his toe. I could tell you about the birds that were Peter's friends, especially the Never birds who lived in the tree above the lagoon, and how her nest fell in the water once, but she kept sitting on it anyway to protect her eggs, and Peter gave orders that no one was to disturb her. A shorter lagoon adventure, and almost as exciting, was Tinker Bell's attempt, with the help of some other fairies, to float a sleeping Wendy back to the mainland on a leaf. Man, she even tried floating her back on a leaf, until Wendy woke up and swam back to Neverland, foiling Tink again. Perhaps the best way to choose is simply to toss a coin, and so the lagoon has won. If you are lucky, when you close your eyes at night, you will sometimes see a lovely lagoon where the mermaids live and sing their beautiful songs. When you are awake, the nearest you can get to this lagoon is the beach at sunset. In the surf. Okay, in the surf means on the sand. Or sorry, on the beach, and the surf is like where the water breaks on the sand. The children spent long summer days at the lagoon, swimming or lazily floating. Much to Wendy's disappointment, the mermaids turned out to be unfriendly as Tinker Bell. When they weren't splashing her with their tails, they ignored her entirely. Does Wendy have a lot of friends? I'm going to just go ahead and leave you guys. I want you just to think about that, and at the end I'll see what your answer is. Does Wendy have a lot of friends in Neverland? The mermaids didn't like the boys either, except, of course, Peter. Peter spent hours talking to the mermaids, or sitting on their tails when they got particularly cheeky. Cheeky means playful. The lagoon was most beautiful at night, when the moon came up and the mermaids began to sing their strange, wailing songs to lure sailors into the rocks. But it was not a safe place for humans then. Wendy knew this and made sure that she always gathered her children and left before dark. On this day, however, as they were all dozing on Marina's Rock after lunch, something strange and frightening happened. It wasn't night yet. At least Wendy didn't think it was, but the lagoon seemed to shift around them. Little shivers ran over the water, and shadows replaced the sun. It was not night that had come. It was something worse. It was something worse. What do you think it might be? What do you think it might be? Miss Cruz is going to go ahead and head back to I'm going to close out of my screen so I can see, just because I want to ask a couple questions. We have about 2 more minutes remaining, but it was something worse. Now, this was describing all the stories that you could hear based off of the adventures on the island, but the one that's staying that they want to go ahead and share is that when they were at the lagoon, and it wasn't night yet, but something shifted. Shivers ran over the water, and shadows replaced the sun. Go ahead and think about that. Go ahead and see how it picks up in the next chapter.